All right, let's just jump right in. What we're doing here is opening a kind of time capsule. Not from years ago, but from one single, totally chaotic 24-hour period in late July 2025. This is just a snapshot of the fire hose of information that hits us every day. A look at our overwhelming, bizarre, and weirdly connected world. So to give you a feel for that whiplash, let's just go. First up, you see this. A massive natural disaster. An earthquake triggers this huge tsunami warning, and reports of a 6-meter wave start coming in. You know, it's the kind of news that just stops you cold. But then you scroll, and literally the next thing you see is this. A beloved Sanrio character, Kurumi, with her whole punk rock thing, is dropping a debut album. And just like that, you've lurched from a potential catastrophe to pop culture. Then, bam, you're snapped right back to hard geopolitics. Tensions are flaring, and a major world power is using the absolute strongest language possible to condemn an act of violence. Suddenly, the world feels very heavy again. And finally, you get this. A personal, kind of weird, but also deeply, deeply human thought shared with the world. From a tsunami to a suplex in the span of maybe a minute. That right there is the internet. So what are we supposed to do with all this? Okay, so let's try to pull on a few threads here and make some sense of the chaos. We'll start with the big stories, right? The high-stakes stuff with real global consequences that were moving the world on that particular day. So that tsunami warning, it started right here. An absolutely monster M8.8 earthquake off the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. And this wasn't just a local story. This thing was so big, it set off tsunami warnings across the entire Pacific Ocean, putting people on alert from Japan all the way over to Hawaii. At the very same time, this really delicate diplomatic dance was playing out. You had two major allies, the UK and France, taking very different paths. The UK was playing it more conditionally, kind of saying, we'll do this if you do that. But France, they came out with a much harder line, condemning violence and calling for the UN to get involved right away. And that statement from France, it wasn't just a random bit of political posturing. No, it was a direct reaction to the killing of Otta Hathaleen. He was a Palestinian activist whose work was actually featured in an Oscar-winning documentary, No Other Land. So his death became this international flashpoint. And it shows you how one single human story can cause these huge diplomatic waves. And, you know, just to pile it on, an economic bombshell dropped too. The US announced this massive, sweeping 25% tariff on everything coming in from India, a huge move that instantly ramped up tensions between two of the world's biggest economies. So you zoom out, and in just one day, you've got natural disasters, diplomatic crises, and trade wars all firing off at once. But look, the world isn't just about politics and disasters, right? While all that heavy stuff was going down, there was this whole other universe of conversation happening. So let's shift gears and look at the cultural side of our little 24-hour snapshot. One thing that was getting, well, louder was heavy music. A Live Nation report showed it was having a huge moment. We're talking a 14% jump in heavy rock shows in just 1 year. And get this, metal was now taking up 13% of all arena and stadium shows. This wasn't an underground thing anymore. This was mainstream. And on the complete flip side of that, you have the Kuromi album. But here's the cool part. Just look at who was producing it. This is a dream team of Japan's most interesting, genre-mashing artists. You've got people from the city pop scene, Vocaloid legends. It's as perfect proof that there's no single trend in culture. There are just a million different, fascinating things happening all at once. Here's a cool little story about preserving culture. There was this legendary humor site from the early text-based days of the internet called Samurai Damashi. Its host was shutting down, which meant the site was just going to disappear. But at the very last second, the community came together, saved all the data, and moved it to a new home. A piece of digital history was saved, and it's a great reminder that the internet actually can have a memory, if we decide it's worth saving. All right, now for my favorite part, the really good stuff. The wonderfully weird, the deeply personal, and sometimes the beautifully pointless content that is, I think, the true soul of the internet. This is its inner monologue. And this quote it perfectly captures it. Someone living in an apartment with a bunch of wood paneling just decided one day to count every single knot in the wood. Why? Who knows? There is no why. But their final takeaway, wow, that's a lot, is just so brilliantly understated and absurd. Okay, so remember that headline from the very beginning? The German suplex? Let's break it down. For anyone who's not a wrestling fan, it's this classic, really dramatic move. You get behind your opponent, grab them, lift them up, and just fall backwards, slamming them onto the mat. It's athletic, for sure, and it takes a ton of trust. And here's the dream itself. A blogger just had this simple thought nagging at them. I've never done that. And I love that they admit they were actually confusing it with a totally different move at first. But they went to a wrestling school and made it happen. Not for fame, not for clicks. It was just a weird little dream. And they put it out there for the world to see. Okay, one last one, because it's just so good. You know that purple tape they wrap around asparagus at the store? A writer bought a whole roll just to answer the question, what else can this do? They tried it on a blanket, it didn't work, just got stuck in the fuzz. But the experiment failing isn't the point. The point is that simple human impulse to just try something, to ask, what if? And then share the answer.
So, tsunamis, trade wars, a cartoon album, and a guy's dream about a wrestling move. We've gone from the globally significant to the beautifully trivial and back again. What in the world are we supposed to make of all this?
I think it's what you could call the paradox of the feed. Everything gets flattened. A global crisis sits right next to someone's personal hobby. A huge scientific breakthrough is right there next to celebrity gossip. And because of this constant flow, we're more aware of everything. The profound suffering happening in the world, yes, but also the tiny specific joys that people are finding. The world is presented to us as serious and absurd and beautiful all at the same time. And really, that brings the question back to you. In this endless, chaotic, contradictory river of information that flows past you all day, where everything is screaming for just a few seconds of your attention, how do you decide what actually matters?